Okay, so I was digging around some of the prototype data for Gen 2, and I noticed something that I'm actually kind of surprised I didn't notice this a little bit sooner. If you look at index number 300, and again, not index number 300 as in like in the National Dexter, but the concept arts that were scrapped, but you'll see an image of the one I'm talking about. There is this Pokemon that kind of looks like it's like a Game & Watch, like the same Game & Watch, Mr. Game & Watch, if you remember, anybody remembers like those old handhelds Nintendo came out with, and same thing with like Super Smash Bros. Melee. You might remember the character Mr. Game & Watch. They kind of had like a sort of like a Mr. Game & Watch character, and it was like, it kind of looked like it was playing a flute, and it had like kind of like three hairs that were like really spiky on the back. It's like I said before, like if you had the index numbers that went up like in Gen 1 that went up to like 299, and we're still missing like the ones from like 192 to like 299, and then it starts at 300. One of the first designs that we have is that you got this like little black and white, or yeah, like he's kind of got like his whole body's black, but his eyes look like they're white. It kind of looks like he's playing a flute though, so kind of like a little pixie sort of humanoid like sort of character, kind of like a fairy sort of. So keep this in mind. So fast forward to some of the other later pre-releases of Pokemon Gold and Silver, because there was like 3 builds of the game. We got another one of like a beta Celebi that was a brownish, and it sort of, and again, it had like the 3 hairs on its back sort of that could have stood out, but it doesn't have the flute. It's got its little arms, and it looks like it's standing on its legs. So, and some people have speculated it was a psychic type originally. Also keep this in mind. So fast forward to the final versions of Pokemon, and we finally get the Pokemon that we anticipated to be Celebi. So this Pokemon was eventually reworked into Celebi, and I believe that this is the Pokemon that started it. So if this is true, Celebi was one of the very first Generation 2 Pokemon that was actually technically created, although not programmed until like near the very end of the game as an idea. Kind of ironic though, because even in the Space World demo, this Pokemon was not originally in the game until later on. And maybe they decided to do something, maybe at the same time though, they weren't done programming the game and what they wanted to put into the games. So Celebi became so again, like I said, I mean, we're still trying to figure out. Generation 1 had roughly like 300 concept designs, but when they started working on Gen 2, I believe this was the first one, if this is true. But again, we still have to look at the 192 to 299 Pokemon. So it's possible Celebi very well could have been the very first Gen 2 Pokemon that was originally designed before it was moved over to Gen 2. If that makes sense. Like, if we're not counting, like, Generation 1 Pokemon that were later moved to Gen 2. I know that might predate it a little bit, but, but we're talking, like, just Gen 2 Pokemon, like, maybe not the first one, maybe not, like, as far as the ones that were originally in Gen 1, but if we're talking about the ones that were drawn for Gen 2, I'm thinking that might have been one of the very first ones that was actually originally designed for Gen 2, even though Celebi was a mythical legendary put at the very end. And so what is Celebi's role? Okay, so Celebi is a grass and a psychic type. But, at this point, it's kind of interesting how they don't just call it a fairy type. But again, it's a psychic grass type because it watches over if you remember where Azalea Town was, just before you get to Goldenrod City, though, because, you cross through that little index forest, or Excel forest, or whatever it's called. Alex Forest. Yeah, so basically, the forest itself, you have this little shrine that's there. And they say that's, if you put the GS ball there, that one ball that was like, nobody knew what was inside of it, but it was Celebi. Celebi was, and who knows where the GS ball like originally came from. That was still the mystery of it. Nobody knows where it came from. And even in the anime, there was like that one time where Ash had the GS ball, and it's like, they didn't know what was in it. And they tried they even tried to get people like Kurt to like, open it up and see, but they had no luck because they couldn't figure out what was it and where did it even come from, So, and that's another thing to think about, even in the concept of a capsule ball, a Pokeball, how do you know what's in it before you even open it up? You know what I mean? How do you tell if a Pokemon's already inside of it before you open it up? But apparently this one was locked, so they were like, oh, hey, maybe there's something in it, maybe Celebi traveled from the future with it being in its GS ball. Maybe the Pokemon it originally belonged, the trainer it eventually belonged to was from the future. That's another way to think about it. But I don't know. Heck, I don't even know. Like, even if you watched the time traveling movie, the one with Celebi, because, you know, all the Pokemon movies were based on legendaries. It's, I don't know what they said about Celebi in that movie. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but it'd be very interesting to see, like, if they ever made any reference to the GS ball. Maybe it's a different Celebi. Who knows? It's definitely a Pokemon that, it's a guardian. You know, what's really cool about Celebi is every time it time travels, it brings an egg back from the future. Who knows what kind of baby Pokemon you'll get, though. So, that's what's pretty cool about Celebi. So, okay, what else did I want to say? There was something else. So, yeah, Celebi definitely was just another Pokemon that was inspired by a lot of beta concept arts. And it's very possible, like, again, I'm noticing a pattern here. A lot of these older beta Pokemon that they had that look like they're scrapped were reworked into something else. It's definitely possible that all the beta Pokemon that they did eventually have very well could have been reused into something else. So all the concept arts that we've seen may actually be final versions of Pokemon. Even if they're Pokemon that we've never got, they probably reworked them into something else. Now, there are some Pokemon that have been scrapped entirely, and maybe they've reworked them into something else, like, again, like different Pokemon, different creatures. You get the idea. I want to say, like, and then there's some of them, like, I don't even know what creatures they're based on, like Electabuzz. I always try to remember. I'm always trying to think, like, what animal was Electabuzz based on, or something like Jinx. Jinx always kind of looked like a humanoid Viking. But then again, you know, there was also the if you remember, there was a scrap Pokemon from Gen 1 called Freeze Jetty, and it's very possible it was supposed to be a male version of Jinx, sort of. But it was like the abominable snowman from the Pokemon, what was it, generation? Yeah, it was a Freeze Jetty that was, you know, inspired by Ultraman 7, like one of the creatures from that. And again, you could see where the reference went. And then they probably had the abominable snow from Gen 4, the one that, you know, the ice and I think it was a grass type too. Then it also had the Pokemon it evolved from. I'm trying to think what that Pokemon was called. It kind of looked like it was like a giant icicle, but it was like a tree Pokemon, you know. I just forget what that Pokemon is, like snow something or something like that. But yeah, it's really interesting actually. So it's what again, you know, I guess Satoshi Tajiri really was telling the truth if you really think about it. You know, all the Pokemon designs they really did come out with. I mean, a lot of the ideas, they did use them. You know, some of them, very rarely, some of them were scrapped, but they did end up using the golden rules that they created. You know, they just rearranged a lot of stuff, and a lot of it was recycled into something else, but it still kept the main premise. And it really does make you wonder how many of these ideas they've had even before they finalized them. It's like the same thing with Lugia that I've been saying, because Lugia has always been my favorite legendary. But I was always convinced, and some people we've kind of went back and forth with this, not in a bad way, but we've had some people that have kind of disagreed with this idea, because we don't have hard evidence, except for the missing no transformations in Gen 2, and even like the Pokemon first movie, because this actually came out, mind you, the very first Pokemon movie 2000 came out before Pokemon Gold and Silver came out, and we can prove this, obviously. But, you know, but here's what I'm saying, though. They had the concept of Lugia and many other Pokemon even before Generation 2. So it's very possible that Lugia could have been one of those 300 Pokemon that they originally designed that could be missing from its index 292. See, that's why I'm convinced that along with, because if you dig into the concept arts and you dig into the index numbers, a lot of people will say that a lot of these Pokemon, like if you look at the scrapped index numbers, and I say index numbers, not national dex numbers, but the index numbers, the ones where like Rhydon was the very first Pokemon and Mew was like the very last one, but it was eventually changed to 21. The one where the missing no counters come in. So put it this way. In Gen 1, there was supposed to be 191 Pokemon. So that much we know. However, though, after that, then this is where it kind of gets a little confusing. 200, it goes up to 299, actually. So if you can believe that there's still a bunch of designs that are missing, What are those 113 Pokemon that are missing, at least? Because why does it start off at 300 when Generation 2's dumps start coming out? And I think I know why. It's very possible that a lot of those Generation 2 Pokemon might have actually been Generation 2 Pokemon that were actually put into the... Like, it's a combination of, like, all the Pokemon that were actually supposed to be in Gen 2 that may have actually have been redesigned, reworked from the final version of Gen 2. Again, missing no Pokemon, like the ones that were... Like, there's two sets of Pokemon that were sort of, you know, pushed back a little bit. We know for a fact that a lot of designs were done before their final releases, but at the same time, though, we know how they were organized a little bit different. I do think that a lot of the Gen 2 Pokemon might have actually been that some of those 113, because again, the missing no transformations, they've taken the data and like they've proven that Lugia, like if you take some of the corrupt data in Gen 1, because again, Gen 1 and Gen 2 were built on the same physics engine. So there's a lot of garbage data in Gen 1 that when transferred over to Gen 2 might turn into something else. And why is that? Is, you know, it's crazy to think that, but it's like maybe those were the Pokemon that were originally... They were saved to the same physics engine, but at the same time, though, it's proof that they had been working on those Pokemon very early on. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of Pokemon that could have been... I mean, and it kind of makes sense because Gen 1 takes place in Gen 2. I mean, you could also argue Gen 3 and 4 sort of take place in the same time period. Maybe not right away, but like sometime in between, because they all take place in Japan. Hell, even all the other Pokemon games take place in the same Pokemon universe. But, you know, if we have time periods to compare it to, then we can go from that based on the character's age, of course. But, you know, but here's what I think is really interesting, though. Let's just talk about the Pokemon designs themselves, aside from, like, Celebi and, you know, of course, Lugia. They predate before Generation 1, if you think about it. And, again, if we can just find a list of these Pokemon, we can prove it even further. I'll prove it with Ho-Oh, for example. Ho-Oh was another Pokemon that was actually supposed to be like in Gen 1's data, believe it or not, but at the same time, though, it wasn't a Pokemon that was necessarily finalized until like Gen 2. And I think, again, that's why I think they wanted to make a sequel to Gen 2, because they figured, you know, all these Pokemon should have been in Kanto, and the Kanto region is, a surprise, right next to the Johto region, which is just, it's all of Japan, believe it or not. So that made sense, you know. It was a huge chunk of Japan, but at the same time, though, or a good chunk of Japan, but, you know, there were different cultures existing in different cultures. Because, again, if you don't know this, and I'll try to slow down a little bit because I know I talk too fast. In Japan, the whole continent of Japan, if you didn't know this, is made up of mostly 8,000-something islands. It could be more, it could be less. There's a lot of stuff that happens in those islands that a lot of people, like, I mean, if you're someone who's traveled to Japan, or even, hell, even lives in Japan, you would know this. You know there's a lot that happens in busy tourist areas like that. So with that being said, it's very possible that even for such a, I don't know if you want to say diverse, like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like all the islands being divided, though, they're not like against each other, but like just land and geology wise, there's a lot that goes on. So when Satoshi Tajiri made the Pokemon series, that was kind of one of the main ideas that they followed. You know, there's always an adventure going on somewhere. There's so much happening everywhere. And, you know, there's so many opportunities that we could easily overlook. I think that's like really the easiest way I can explain it. You might actually, if you're still kind of confused at what I'm getting at, you just message me. I'll try to explain it the best I can. But basically, it's like the same thing with a lot of these concept arts. Certain Pokemon are found in certain locations. Certain Pokemon might have gotten scrapped because they might have found even better ideas. Again, they were making a series that was very complex, very, like, it was not just singular. It was like multitasking, and so, like, due to time constraints, maybe limitations, and even budgets, the Pokemon they wanted to create, and they still had a long list of stuff they had to cut back on. So they had to vote on the ones they wanted. They put the ones they wanted in the games. And if the rest is history, basically all the scrapped ideas that we never did get, either we got them as something else, or maybe they just rework it into something else for like a future reference. I think that's what happened in a lot of ways. But I still do think some designs have gone missing, though, because if you think about it, with the series as well as Pokemon, they would have no other choice but to organize it as such. So with a Pokemon series such as, you know, the ones that we've gotten, again, look at Gold and Silver, for example. Put it this way, if you want to know what I'm getting at. You know, you look at Generation 1, and we had 151 Pokemon. But by the end of Gen 2 that we know, or but before they even started designing for Gen 2, they already had 300 designs. 149 of them after that were just, you know, it was, that's another 149 designs that were almost gone. So it's like, wow, you know, and then you fast forward to Gen 2, and so far we were able to recover, I think it goes from 300 to 448 or something like that, the index numbers. And so you have a lot of those Pokemon that were reused, recycled, but now you start asking the other question, how many other Pokemon after 448 does it go up to, you know? So you really think about it, you know, it's like the whole, like, how many Pokemon have they designed total? How many of them have they kept? And I think as time went on, because limitations were no longer the problem, aside from maybe like them having to recycle a lot of stuff, because I know some people say they do this with Game Freak, but it's like how many ideas they really did end up using. Like a lot of the concepts, like I know when Gen 4 was hit, a lot of people noticed, like they were saying, like there's not too many fire type Pokemon. And if you really think about it, like a lot of the concepts that they had for Gen 4 were actually recycled from Gen 2. A lot of scrapped ideas that they had might have reworked into something else. A lot of Pokemon, like I'll give you an example, like Leafeon, and there was a Pokemon, like, you know, there was a Pokemon that Tangela evolved into. It wasn't called Tangagrowth at the time, but that's the Pokemon we ended up getting, though. Some Pokemon, a lot of Pokemon were moved from Gen 2 to Gen 4 that were in the prototype that we hadn't seen. Even Shellos from Gen 2 and the one that it evolves into, I always forget, Gastrodon? Wow, I think that's the one. That Pokemon was later moved to Gen 4 as well, but it was supposed to be in Gen 3. So it's like you really see, like, you know, they come up with an idea they liked, and they just use it for the next duration, you know. So I wouldn't be surprised that they keep a lot of this stuff. Like, again, and so Satoshi Tajiri did state that there was a lot of ideas they had. They scrapped a lot of them, but they also kept organized reports, and especially with a series that you really love, of course they had to have, you know, so a lot of the stuff still does exist in their backlog somewhere. You know, backlog meaning like, you know, cloud servers or whatnot. So all these ideas could still be out there waiting to be discovered. But how do we get it, though? How do we convince them to release it, though? I think it would be very interesting if they did release all of it, because it would be interesting to see, like, you know, how many different concept arts they really did have, or maybe like if they do have that, like, available still. That would be actually be interesting. I think Satoshi Tajiri would definitely be proving something, because again, you know, you think about like how many Pokemon they have created and how many Pokemon they finalized. And as the later series went on, eventually we started to see that it seems like they had more control over it, because they weren't having to scrap the ideas. They just basically, you know, they were able to finally put all those games into the game. Because, like, you know, like when Gen 2 came out, I can't say the same thing with, or Gen 3, sorry. When games were over on the Game Boy Advance, the cartridges changed. They were finally able to put more memory in them. And of course, you know, everything looked a lot different, a lot more, you know, prettier, because, you know, the graphic capabilities, a lot more, they had a lot more power to utilize, because, you know, technology got better. So basically, I think it was, what was it, up to like 32 megabytes, I believe they could use. I'm trying to remember. But they basically were able to take a lot of designs, and they didn't have to scrap them due to cartridge limitations, because that was no longer the problem at this point in time. So they basically were able to, like, utilize all the ideas that they had at the time, unless they scrapped some that we didn't know of, whether due to time constraints or, you know, maybe they had too many ideas. But again, you know, until we have like something to compare it to, we're probably not going to know how many Pokemon after Gen 2 that they really did scrap, and how many generation like scrap concept arts, unless somebody like starts leaking all the prototype index numbers. So it's kind of something to think about. I think, aside from the maps and all that, the Pokemon designs, how many Pokemon designs did they have? Which ones didn't make it? Which ones were recycled? And you can kind of start seeing like the repetition patterns of, like they taught us like with Sesame Street, or like like when we were kids, like they'd show you a pattern and then they'd leave the rest blank. But if you like really study it enough, you can figure it out. And so it's like the same thing with like looking at these organization index numbers. You see like a bunch of them, and then there's some of them are blank. We'll just refer to them as a missing no. And a lot of people thought missing no was a glitch at the time, but really it wasn't. It was actually just a placeholder for a Pokemon that used to be there, because it was labeled. Because again, the index numbers that they were originally drawn in, like Rhydon and then Kangaskhan were the second ones, all the way up to 191. And then they started, that's why they had some of these slots that were saved incorrectly, because they were they originally were drawn and illustrated differently in a different order. But then once the Pokemon were reorganized, because a lot of people, when you started playing Pokemon, a lot of people thought Bulbasaur was the very, very first Pokemon, but that was not always true. Bulbasaur was not the first Pokemon. As a matter of fact, it was one of the last ones that was designed, if I remember correctly. I know, what was it? Victory Bell was the very last Pokemon aside from Mew. I think it was 190 was Victory Bell. But basically, that explains why some of the Pokemon were pulled out, because they originally designed it to be in 191, but due to cartridge limitations, they had to cut back on stuff. So that's kind of what threw the whole thing off, was now we got to go back and edit it, and until we can get this thing to work the way we want it to. So I guess that's just what happens with technology, and the rest is history. And then, some people, and here's another question some people ask. Even if Game Freak wanted to go back and change the series, like, why don't they just go back and re-add some of this stuff at this point? Well, because if you think about, like, they would be changing the whole series up until this point. Really, the best thing you can do, if you're going to take an idea that you originally had like years ago, and we're talking like 30 years ago, because if you don't know, Pokemon, the early final version, the very first version of Pokemon that was technically released was in 1995. However, though, the pre-prototype assets that we know of date back to like anywhere between like 1989 to like 1995. So there was like a good 6 years they were designing those games as time went on. So a lot has changed. I'm actually doing, as I make this, I am doing a Pokemon Green 1.0, the very first Pokemon version that was released. It's in Japanese, and I know some people don't know Japanese, so I'll do the best I can to explain all this. But there are some stuff that you can see that they didn't change, that even at the very start you can sort of see this. Like, I'll give you an example. Like some of the Pokeboxes, for example, it only goes up to 8. However, though, you can still catch 151 out of 160 plus the 6 in your inventory, the Pokemon. But keep in mind, though, you still need at least one spot open, because up until Gen 1 and 2, you couldn't just put a Pokemon in the PC, switch it, and then put it back. There always had to be that one box that had either 19 or 20 out of 20, and then you put the Pokemon in there, and then you can withdraw it. So it was technically like 165, if I got that right. I know, it's like, but that was the thing, though. Game Freak was still figuring this out, because they were overwhelmed. Like, they weren't much of programmers, and that's what a lot of people don't understand about Game Freak. They wanted to create something, but little did they know, not only did they not have as much experience, but at the same time, though, they didn't give up. They were dreamers that just kept going, And it's remarkable. It really is. Like, every time I read these stories and find this prototype data, that's why Pokemon was always interesting to me, and I think to a lot of people. I mean, I still say it to this day. You look at what Satoshi Tajiri came up with. Anybody who's played the games, you don't have to explain it. Everybody who's played Pokemon knows what that series was about. But at the same time, though, over time, you start to realize, like, he not only made so much money off the trilogy, and success came his way. People wanted to know who he was, wanted to know everything. But at the same time, though, it's like, now you had people that love the series so much that even 30 years later, there's people that they want to take everything they created in those games and they make their own hacks and all that. Like, there's so many ROM hacks that people like. Let me give you an example, just in case you don't know this. Just in case, there's Game Boy Advance games, 32 megabyte cartridges that like these games are built on, and I mean, even though they're using emulators, sure, that they're creating these ROM hacks of the original Game Boy Advance games. They're going back and redoing all the designs. They're taking like Gen 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Games that were released on the DS, the 3DS, and the Nintendo Switch and all that. They're taking those sprites and redesigning them into Game Boy sprites, and they're putting them into these games. Like, I mean, like it's nuts. It's like, I mean, you're talking about people that they love this series so much because somebody created it that they're willing to go back and try to make games that are even better than the original games. Like, I mean, like that's just on a whole nother level of awesome if you think about it. And I don't know if Satoshi Tajiri really realized that. Like he just even like the first interviews he did when he created the series, he stated that like all he wanted to do was create something that people would love and remember him for. And then all of a sudden, he was like overwhelmed. Like somebody was overwhelmed that they won the lottery, for example. Like, it's like who's prepared for that? It never happens. I mean, it does happen to people, but never gamble. It's not worth it. But what I'm saying though is, if you go through hard work and success, it can pay off. You can make a lot of money in life, even if you're not in a lot of money. You can make a lot of money just by following your dreams too. You just got to get a lot of people to know you exist somehow. That's all you got to do. But have morals and work hard and help people out. Don't just do things for the wrong reason. It's basically the lesson I think Satoshi Tajiri was trying to get at here. Satoshi Tajiri could die tomorrow, and you know what? He would still be happy with what he did. But of course, he's still alive, and let's hope he lives even longer because, he wants to keep making games, and I hope he keeps that up because I love the work that they put into these games. I do. I know that sometimes they release them unfinished, and sometimes system updates can be a pain in the ass, but at the same time though, I do appreciate the fact that he's still willing to stand by a lot of the ideas that they created. I do like the concepts that I like the way they think, like the way Game Freak does think with a lot of the games they make. So, I mean, yeah, there might be some things that don't make sense here and there, but you know what I mean? But at least he created something. He gave back to people. And you know what? I'm all for that. So you know what? I hope they do. And this video's already gone on long enough, but you see what I'm saying. I'm willing to make videos because, I can talk about this. And there's people that we can have a conversation about what this guy created. And it's just, trying to figure out all the stuff people don't know about it. It's really interesting, actually. So Celebi, let's go back into it. So Celebi was a Pokemon it's a guardian that time travels. And it's not, and again, even though Celebi's got the ability to time travel, it's not the master of time itself. Again, Dialga would definitely be able to. Kind of reminds me, like, if anybody's ever played Mystery Dungeons 2. You could play Time, Darkness, or Sky. I'd recommend the Sky version because it's like the more complete version. But in even in the Sky version, in the version, you had the shiny Celebi that was in love with Groby. And Grovyle, was it Grovyle? Yeah, Grovyle. And so it's funny because if you think about it, the what was it, all the, like, there's that one part where they try to go through the time portal, but Dialga's like able to stop time before like Celebi's using its time traveling powers, and so Dialga's like because it's, well, at that time it was under the work of Darkrai, and so it's really interesting to think how they did that. It's like really showing you, like, more than one Pokemon have like the same ability, but some of them are actually better at utilizing it instead. Like, I mean, just imagine that. Imagine that you have this concept of time travel, but then imagine that there's even some god out there that could stop time itself. And you're sitting there thinking, like, how does that even work? Like, the concept of time traveling is already insane, but now you got someone who can do he has more control over that. And I thought that was just pretty cool because, like, in the game, it's like, again, you see them using the time portal, like they're going back in time, and then all of a sudden, just before it happens, they're like, wait a minute, what just happened? Time stopped because of Dialga. Really interesting, actually. I just think, like, that's another thing that I always liked about Pokemon. And the reason I bring this up, because we're talking about Celebi, that's the thing that popped in my head. I was like, it's like the little details they try to focus on. They went through all that trouble in the story of Mystery Dungeons 2, plotting a perfect escape, ruined by a Time Lord itself. So you get to learn a little bit more about Celebi and Dialga, because they're time travelers, basically. One's the creator of time, and the other one's, well, one that's the master of time. It's Arcturus and Palkia's left and right wingman. The time traveling in space, creating entities. It's really cool, actually. I think Pokemon definitely had a lot of work put into it. It does make me wonder how they came up with certain designs and all that. But again, Celebi's a time traveler, Dialga's a time maker, and I still do think Dialga is stronger than Palkia, not just type-wise, but, time. Like, I've had this debate with some people, like, we've had this idea that, what's more important, time or space? And some people think space, time doesn't even exist. Some people think it's all just, infinite space. But here's something to think about. Time itself is actually a bigger variable than space itself is, because you could technically go everywhere in space. Let's just say you had that ability, but you could do it at a different time velocity. Therefore, there can be even more time than space. So if that's true, I could go back in time to, like, an infinite number of times, let's say, endless, to the same location, and then go to the next location and then do that. So it's like basically how many times you can do it versus how many times in space. So it's like you get this times space and time times infinity to the infinite power, and basically it's just endless either way you look at it. So I mean, again, that's confusing to think about, I know, but but basically more probability. So time and velocity, time and space. Dialga and Palkia go hand in hand, sort of. Definitely left and right. I would definitely say, as far as Arcturus goes, if we're saying that Arcturus is the most powerful Pokemon, it's very, until we know who Arcturus's mother and father are, because it has confirmed that, like, there is more, then we definitely know that Pokemon takes place in a multiverse. But where exactly are we? That's still the question. So if we're going all the way to the top, that's what we know so far. But again, I just make videos talking about this stuff, but if we can figure this stuff out, believe me, I'll make more videos about it. But until then, again, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. I will be making more. Again, consider the things I'm saying. I know I can sort of ramble a little bit, and I can kind of get off topic, but but that's kind of the thing, though. When we make these videos, the more ideas we have to think about, I'm still accomplishing my goal. We're here to negotiate, rather, like time travelers and Pokemon, and see what we can do with this series. Because I mean, wow, man, even if it's been out for 30 years, there's so much we can still talk about.